Welcome back. Now we are going to see how in practice it works when we send an HTTP POST request from AngularJS to PHP. This is a form, like a login form. It has three components. The first one is the input field for the username. The second one is for password, and the third one is the button, login button. Now we want to send the data of this form from AngularJS to PHP. Here we have created a project called AngularJS Tutorials in our WAM server. And inside this project, I have created some files and folders. I have created a PHP file called index.php. This index.php is the web form, the form from which we want to collect the data. We have input type text, and its ng model is form.username. And the second one is input type password, and its ng model is form.password. We want to send the data of these two input fields using AngularJS to PHP file to process. Now we look at our app.js. In our app.js, I have created an array here called scoop.form, and it has two properties. The first one is the username, which is empty here, and password, which is also empty here. And I have used these two properties, username and password, in my HTML or index.php file. Then I have created a function called submit, and this function works when I click on the login button. Inside this function, we have the important portion of the code, which is used to send the request. Before all, I have created an array called config, in which I have written the three things we need to identify in the parameter array of the HTTP function. The method is post, the URL is here /AngularJS tutorials, which is the root folder, then /server pages. Here we have a folder called server pages, and inside this folder I have the login PHP. I write login.php. This is the URL of the PHP file I am going to send my form data. And here I have the data, which is the real data of the form I want to send to the PHP file. The first thing is the username. Here I have written username, and its value is scoop.form.username. And the second thing is the password I want to send to the PHP file. So I have written here password, and its value is scoop.form.password. I pass this config into the HTTP function, and I create my request. After having created the request, I call the then function along with two parameters. The first parameter is an anonymous function, which is the success function, and the second parameter is another anonymous function, which is the error function. Now, if my request goes successfully, this function executes. This portion of the code executes. If there is an error in my request, then this piece of code or this function executes. Now I see my PHP file. Here I have the login file, or login.php file. Before writing anything, I have written the two lines of code which are necessary in order to get the request and decode the request data. With this line of code, I get my request, and with this line of code, I decode my request data, or my the data which comes from the web page. After having received the request, now I want to process the form data. Here I have created a variable which is optional. It is username, and its value is the username property of the request. And I have also created another variable called password, and its value is the password property of the request. These properties that we use here, like username and password, must also be defined in the data portion of this config. Now I do not have a database to validate the user. Just I wanted to make sure the request comes successfully. Here I have created a message from login.php. Your username is username and password is password. And then I echo the message. I return the message to AngularJS code. In the AngularJS code, or inside the code, I can manipulate the data. Now I want to test whether the request goes successfully or no. My username is Ajmal and password is. I click on login. I see that here it gave me the message from login.php. Your username is Ajmal and password is QWE. Now here I change the name of the login.php to logins.php to see whether this error function works or not. Okay, I save the changes, then I come here and refresh my page and write my username as Ajmal and password 123, and I click on the login button. Here there is a 404 error message. So we see that when the request did not go successfully from the AngularJS to the PHP file, an error occurs, and the error is usually handled inside the second function or in the body of the second function. One might ask that what is this data that we use? If we use the then function instead of success function, this data property is automatically added to the response which comes from the server. If we use success instead of then there is no data property for the response. If we now remove this data property, and here I remove the S and then I save the changes. If I come here and refresh the page and then write username password, then I see that this is the response which comes from the server, and it has a property called data, and we use this property in order to get this message here. Say response.data. Username, password. From login.php, your username is this one and password is this one. So in this way, I can send my HTTP request from AngularJS to PHP.